welcome to Mind Body Insights, an interview series where I sit down with experts in the field of holistic health to increase awareness of our mind-body systems and share practical tools that you can start to implement right away to see positive impacts on your life. My name is Chelsea Kath. I am the founder of Brooklyn Mindbody Collective, a wellness center offering complementary and holistic healthcare to our community while supporting one another's growth as practitioners. And today I have the pleasure of sitting down with Kathleen Bostleman, who is our yoga instructor and licensed massage therapist at Brooklyn Mindbody Collective. Kathleen has experience working with diverse populations from beginners of all ages to professional dancers and athletes. Her sessions focus on strength and mobility, beginner instruction, sustainable practice plans, and body awareness to help her clients integrate their practice outside of sessions. Today, she will be sharing her expertise on yoga for beginners, including some of the common struggles that she notices in her students and top tips on how to perform postures safely and effectively. Hello, Kathleen. So happy to be sitting down with you.
Hi, how are you?
Doing great, thank you. So I'm so excited to hear about your expertise for beginner yoga because I know it's an area that so many people feel intimidated by, especially with the how common it is to start by going to group classes and how it can feel really overwhelming. So for someone who's just getting started with a flow yoga, which is kind of the typical style that's taught everywhere these days, the coordination of breath and movement can be confusing. What's some advice you would offer to students who feel that way?
Yeah, so I find this to be a really common issue and one that I get a lot of questions about from beginners. And they'll ask, I hear my instructors saying, inhale, halfway lift, exhale, fold, inhale, step the back foot back, and they're kind of inundated with way too many cues early on around breath. And while those cues can be helpful as you progress in your practice and get a little bit more comfortable with your vocabulary, it can just be a little overwhelming at first. And so my recommendation usually to beginners is to start with practicing integrating your breath in more repetitive movements. So things like cat-cow, do things you can play with. Inhale will move into your cow pose, and then exhale, you'll push it into your cat pose. And you can switch back and forth. It's maybe not as necessary that you're doing one or the other on your inhale or exhale, but you can start to see how your breath can facilitate your movement when you have the opportunity to keep repeating that breath over and over, and you don't have to worry so much about what the movement is in that moment. Of course, as you get a little bit more comfortable with the practice, there are times that generally people find that an inhale or exhale makes the movement a little bit easier. But for the beginning, I think it's easier to just say, I'm just going to ride with this, and I'm going to start playing with this a little bit more on those more simplistic movements.
That's some really great advice to kind of start with a more repetitive movement and linking the breath into that so you don't have to worry about so many changing cues. Now, sun salutations, which are the dynamic and fast-paced warm-up in most flow classes, they have some pretty tricky transitions for anyone, but especially for beginners. What are a couple of things that you see your students struggle with, and how can they make these movements and transitions smoother?
Yeah, so sun salutations, for people who don't know, they're kind of the core base for a lot of vinyasa flow yoga classes that you'll see in an open level studio environment, and they typically run on a faster pace as they're instructed in most classes, and they're often not instructed in a detailed sense. They're sort of thrown in as like this icing on the cake that just everybody knows, and it's this common vocabulary, which is great if you're party to that vocabulary. And so there are a lot of transitions that have to happen in that movement that are tricky, require a lot of mobility and just a lot of nuance. And so some of the things that I see beginners struggle with is one of the big ones is stepping forward from down dog. So if you can imagine, down dog is this pose where you're basically making a triangle with your body, your hands are in front and your feet are in back, and you're lifting a leg and stepping it through between your hands. And that requires a lot of mobility, honestly, to some degree, a certain type of body proportion. Really long arms serves well in that transition. And there are a lot of things that have to happen to make that possible. My recommendation with beginners, there are options, propless options that you can take, like stepping the leg around, that kind of bypass the movement. You're just saying, okay, this isn't an option for me today, I'm not going to do it. And we're going to take this other way. My recommendation for beginners is actually to attempt the movement, to step the foot forward between your hands, but then to actually lower the back knee down and adjust the foot. So you're building the mechanics to try that true movement rather than just taking a different option. And that gives you something to work towards. And I will be creating a video that's actually detailing 5 of my top tips for beginners, and that'll include some demos of these movements, and we'll link that in the description for this video. The other transition that I find people really struggling with in those beginning stages is chaturanga. And if you haven't seen chaturanga before, you're basically in a plank with your legs extended behind you, and you lower down to the mat slowly, either all the way down to the ground, or then you flow into something like an upward facing dog or a low cobra, some sort of back bend. This is super tricky and requires a lot of strength and, yet again, a lot of mobility, and a really clear sense of the mechanics that need to happen. Often teachers will give a different option. It's knees, chest, chin. Not a bad movement, nothing wrong with knees, chest, chin, but I don't find that it prepares students for doing a chaturanga in the long term. What my usual recommendation is to lower your knees, and then once again to practice the movement, and we'll show that in that video. I always tell beginners, work towards something. So build your mechanics up first. Try to dissect the movement rather than just taking an option that feels like you're just taking a break. Let's work on this together and figure out where the issues are, rather than just saying, okay, it's not an option for me today.
Yeah, absolutely. And having taken classes with you, I think that's one of the things you're really masterful, is breaking a difficult movement down into its component parts so that people are really building with the correct building blocks to be able to do it correctly and safely. And it's great that you've made a video demonstrating these things, because especially for beginners, it can be really, like, the terminology is not settled in yet. So that'll be a great thing that we'll actually link to in this video description, so that our viewers can actually see Kathleen demonstrating these adjustments and these building blocks. Then moving on, one of the main reasons that people practice yoga is to improve their balance. Do you have a specific tip to help them with this?
Yeah, so, one of the things I tell beginners about their balance, it is a dynamic thing. It's not, a good balance does not look static. Good balance is adapting to all the little shifts and micro movements that your body makes over time. But one of the places that I think we first start to see issues with balance in the yoga class, because usually we'll start with standing positions with 2 legs on the ground rather than jumping right into something like a tree pose that's on 1 leg, is in the setup for those two-legged positions. So they'll set up and they're basically standing on a tightrope. So 1 leg is like right in front of the other, or even just hips width apart. So it's a very tiny stance, and it doesn't give you a lot of ability to ground and stand firm. So I usually recommend for beginners to take a slightly wider stance than you might naturally do, something a little bit wider than hips distance apart. And that's usually easier to set up when you're lower to the ground. And so we'll show you some demos for that in the video as well, about when is a good time to actually make those adjustments in class.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. So it's essentially like widen the foundation and the base of support to build up that standing balance.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Now, Shavasana, or corpse pose, is the 5-minute resting pose that comes at the end of class that people generally either love or hate. Kathleen, do you have any advice on how students can come to embrace this part of the practice and really gain the benefits of this resting pose?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Shavasana, it can be super strange. The first time you witness a Shavasana, you probably, most people, the first time they experience a Shavasana, it's at the end of what felt like a workout. You've attended this yoga class, you've been moving for maybe an hour, and then all of a sudden everyone lays down and goes essentially to sleep, and you're like, what is happening? And for whatever reasons, for some people, that's just not a good option. And so I usually offer people quite a few different options that will give them the same sense, or creates the conditions where they might be able to downregulate, take a chill pill for five minutes. But it may not be laying on your back with your eyes closed. So for some people, that means keeping their eyes open so that they can see the room, and that's always an option. Sometimes it means sitting up, so you can either take like a seated meditation or lean up against a wall. A lot of people like the grounding support of a wall behind you. And for some people, it's truly the act of laying on your back is just not very comfortable. So things like constructive rest with your feet wide and your knees together can be a better option in those scenarios. And I always tell people, even if your yoga teacher has not offered you these options, most yoga teachers are pretty empathetic. They understand. And so even if the option hasn't been explicitly stated, it's an okay one to take. Your yoga teacher just wants to see that you're having a couple moments for yourself to integrate what we've done in the practice, and to just take a step back before moving through the rest of your day.
Yeah, those are really great suggestions, again, to really modify based on their honest experience in their bodies instead of just trying to do what everyone else in the room is doing.
Right.
Yeah. And how can students continue to learn from and work with you?
Yeah, so we will be, of course, we'll be adding that video in the description for this video, and that'll include some demos of the positions that we talked about today. I will be offering a yoga for absolute beginners over the next few weeks, and we'll be sending out information on that if you hop on our newsletter. And that series will be a short, probably 4-class series that will really break down some of these trickier, more complicated poses and transitions for people who have never taken yoga before. But it will also be good for those of you who have been doing yoga maybe for a little longer, but want to kind of regress, take a moment and step back and break down some of the stuff that you probably just haven't covered in class. And then, as always, you're welcome to continue to work with us on one-on-one. The best way to do that is to book through brooklynmindbody.com. You can also follow us on Instagram at Brooklyn Mindbody. Did I get that handle right?
That's the one.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great.
Try to keep it very simple. Like, where are we? Brooklyn. What are we dealing with? Mind body. Brooklyn Mind Body.
That is the handle. But yeah.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Well, yeah, we'll be sure to link to all of those things that Kathleen just mentioned in the description to this video so that you can grab that free video. You can follow us on Instagram, and we'll also be announcing there when Kathleen does announce her beginner yoga series, which will be really great to get started in your practice if you are here locally in New York City. Kathleen, thank you so much for sharing this information. I know I learned things even as a long time practitioner, and it's just so great to hear some of your knowledge.
Thank you, Chelsea. It's been fun.
Yeah, my pleasure. See you later.
Bye.